Okay, I want to talk about this book. Courage is Calling, Fortune Favors the Brave. It's Ryan Holiday's new book. Read most of his stuff. Most of it's pretty good. But the story that he talks about in the first chapter is really interesting. So, the first chapter, or part one, I should say, is called Fear. And there's a really interesting quote at the beginning. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. William Ernest Henley. So, in the context of courage, the quote makes a lot of sense. The first chapter is largely about Florence Nightingale, and chapter 1 is called The Call We Fear. And I liked this story, which is why I want to make the video so I don't forget about it. So Florence Nightingale, I think, was born in 1821, early 19th century. And her story is fascinating. I knew just anecdotally of Florence Nightingale, her relationship with the Red Cross, and that she was in hospitals. I have this image in my mind when I think of Florence Nightingale with like a lamp, I don't know why, in barracks. And so I knew that she had been involved in medicine as a famous nurse, but I didn't know a lot of the backstory. I also didn't know that she wasn't a nurse for a very long time. I also didn't know that she was born into a position of tremendous privilege. So I want to read some excerpts from the first chapter that I think will give some context and that I want to remember. On February 7th, 1837, at age 16, she was to get what she would later refer to as the call, to what to wear and how. All she could feel was that it was a mysterious word from on high which imparted to her the sense that something was expected of her, that she was to be of service, to commit to something different than the life of her rich and indolent family, something different than the constraining and underwhelming roles available to women in her time. It's important when we look at the story of Florence Nightingale to throw ourselves back to that time period and think of the role of women and think of the parts of society that really were rich and indolent. And if you were born into that situation, most people would try and stay there. But she felt motivated to do something more. And you might expect that the story would go, so she went out on her adventure and did her thing and became the Florence Nightingale that we know. But there was a big space in between the time that call came and the time that she became the Florence Nightingale that we know. For 8 years, this call sat there in the recesses of Florence's mind like an elephant in the room not to be addressed. Meanwhile, she was vaguely aware that all was not right in the Victorian world. Life expectancy was barely 40 years at birth. In many cities, mortality was higher for patients treated inside hospitals than outside them. Can you imagine? In the Crimean War, where Nightingale would later distinguish herself, just 1,800 men out of some 100,000 troops died of their wounds. More than 16,000 died of disease. 1,800 died from wounds. 16,000 died of disease. And 13,000 more were rendered unable to serve. Even in peacetime, conditions were terrible, and to enlist was itself life-threatening. I'm just skipping around here. Barraged with this banal pressure, Florence ignored the call, afraid to let it intrude on polite society. Sure, she helped the occasional sick neighbor, she read books, she met interesting people, etc., etc., but still, at 25, when she was offered an opportunity to volunteer at the Salisbury Hospital, she let her mother squelch it. So this is very interesting to me because she felt motivated to leave the nest, to go and do something meaningful, and she didn't for 8 years. And I'm sure that there was a lot that went into that, pressure that we don't understand, but I think a lot of pressure that we do understand because we all feel, I think, pressures to stay close to the fire, to stay comfortable. These were painful lies that she internalized. Dr. Howe, Florence once ventured to ask Samuel Gridley Howe, physician and husband to Julia Ward Howe, the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So this is a letter that she wrote to this guy. Do you think it would be unsuitable and unbecoming for a young Englishwoman to devote herself to works of charity in hospitals? Do you think it would be a dreadful thing? Her questions were loaded with so many assumptions, unsuitable, unbecoming, dreadful. She was torn. And then this guy responds to her letter, "My dear Miss Florence, it would be unusual. And in England, whatever is unusual is thought to be unsuitable." I really like that. "But I say to you, go forward. If you have a vocation for that way of life, act up to your inspiration, and you will find there is never anything unbecoming or unladylike in doing your duty for the good of others. Choose, go on with it, wherever it may lead you." Wise words. In the so-called hero's journey, the call to adventure is followed in almost all cases by what? The refusal of the call. Because it's too hard, too scary, because they most obviously have picked the wrong person. That's the conversation Nightingale had with herself, not for a little while, but for 16 years. So that was the length of time that it took, 16 years, for her to leave the tent. Fear does this. It keeps us from our destiny. It holds us back. It freezes us. It gives us a million reasons why or why not. So after 16 years, she leaves the nest and throws herself into the work of medicine and solving the problem of disease that was talked about before. And at the end, not at the end, but in the middle, she says, "I've been well acquainted," she explained, "with the dwellings of the worst parts of most of the great cities in Europe, but have never been in any atmosphere which I could compare with that of the barrack hospital at night." But by now the fear was gone. In its place was steely determination. She funded the repairs out of her own pocket and got to work. She picked up Crimean fever during that time, which she dealt with for the rest of her life. And I think that this story resonated with me so much because I think we all experience this type of thing. There will almost always be that call to leave the comfort of wherever it is we are and go do something, go contribute. And most of the time the call goes unanswered, and sometimes we push it off. But what else is there? I think it has to do with many things, one of which is contribution or consumption. Are you going to stay and consume, or are you going to get out and contribute? And in my mind, what else is there than contribution, than becoming competent, and then going and using that competence to make things better, to make a difference, to do something meaningful. But it's not easy. So those 16 years that Florence Nightingale said no are interesting years. 16 years is a long time. Yet she still did what she did. There are a few different things that you could take out of that. One, that it's probably not too late. Even if you said no for 16 years, you could probably still say yes and go out and make a difference. Number two, Florence Nightingale made a massive difference in the way that healthcare is run today. And it's just her. The organization of the Red Cross, the way triage is done, there are a lot of things, and I'm no expert, but that are better today because she chose to answer the call. The world needs competent people that are willing to take a step into the dark, that are willing to combat ambiguity, that are willing to, at the expense of social position or perception, do something unusual but valuable, to make sacrifices to go and do something difficult. It's also important to understand that she didn't come out unscathed, that she dealt with problems for the rest of her life that were a consequence of her going on the journey. So it's not that you'll leave and everything will be great. You will leave and see what the darkness is really like. As she describes those barracks, I can only imagine what that must have been like. I can only imagine. There's probably horror that she faced every day. But at some point, she embraced that as her mission and moved on, as it says in the book, with steely determination. So the end of the chapter, there's a part that I really like. Holiday says, "Fear will make itself felt. It always does. Will we let it prevent us from answering the call? Will we leave the phone ringing? Or will we inch ourselves closer and closer, as Nightingale did, steeling ourselves, preparing ourselves until we're ready to do what we were put here to do?" We were put here to do big things. I was put here to do big things. And Florence Nightingale is a wonderful example of eventually pushing out the fear, answering the call, and making a difference. That's what we all need to do. That's what I need to do. So I'll probably come back with future chapters and talk through them, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget that story. So Florence Nightingale, it's a goodie.